Welcome to the Andy Stanley Leadership Podcast, a conversation designed to help leaders go further, faster. Today we are focusing on the ever-present pressure every leader feels to get bigger, faster. Andy, we're going to listen to an excerpt of a talk you did at really a surprising venue. It was the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yep.
How did that happen?
Well, this was pretty cool. My dad's a pastor of Southern Baptist Church, and so he's actually been in the same church for 40 years, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And so they decided to honor him because he's a past president of the convention. So in this event right before the convention called the Pastors Conference, they asked him, they brought him up to honor him, and then they asked him to introduce me and ask me to speak. So they're sort of honoring him and asking me to speak that honors him, and it was cool. And as you know, I grew up Southern Baptist. Right. Our church isn't a Southern Baptist church, but I'm so grateful for being raised in a church where I got the biblical foundation I did and the values that I did, and so they asked me to speak, and I said, absolutely.
That's great. And in this talk, you talk about 3 leadership principles where you really sort of dig into 3 quotes that I think you have hanging on your office wall. And the one that you talk about in the clip today is by the founder of Chick-fil-A, Truett Cathy.
Yeah, this was, and I have a bunch of things hanging on my wall, and I love to talk about these quotes. This is one of the newer ones. David Salyers, one of the vice presidents for Chick-fil-A, was rotating off our board. And he was giving kind of a charge to our whole team, you know, don't forget, always remember, you know, one of those kinds of things. And in the context of that, he told the story that I tell in this clip. And at the end of the story, he made a statement that just jumped out at all of us. It was a big idea. And whenever I hear things like that, I write them down and I hang them in my office because there's just some things you want to keep in front of you, you know, for as long as possible. So that's where this quote came from.
Great. Well, let's listen.
Do we have any Chick-fil-A fans in the house? Yeah. For those of you that don't know what a Chick-fil-A is, it's as close as to becoming a Christian, I think. It's kind of in Atlanta, Chick-fil-A is like the Christian food. So let me tell you this story about Chick-fil-A. Here we go. Truett Cathy, founder of Chick-fil-A. Things are going along. They're building these restaurants all over the country. And back in the early 90s, a restaurant came out called Boston Chicken that eventually became Boston Market. You may be familiar with Boston Market. Boston Market was the first competition that Chick-fil-A really ever had in terms of their market value. And Boston Market came out with an IPO, and they had a ton of money, and they started building stores all over the country, and suddenly Chick-fil-A felt pressure. And this is the first time Chick-fil-A had really had any competition in their particular market. So all the smart guys at Chick-fil-A started asking the question, how can we get bigger, faster, bigger, faster, bigger, faster, bigger, faster? So this went on for about a year of discussion. They sent some guys to New York to see how much money they could borrow, to see if they could build more Chick-fil-A's, and Chick-fil-A has very, very little to no debt, and they were going to borrow a bunch of money to keep up with Boston Market, build all these stores all over the country. So this entire discussion that went on for about a year culminated one afternoon at Chick-fil-A headquarters, and a friend of mine was there, and this is the story he told me. He said, we're all sitting around the conference room. Truett Cathy's down on the end. He's in his 70s by this time. He said, and all the young bucks, all the young guys got all these charts and graphs and all these ideas of how we can get bigger, faster, bigger, faster, bigger, faster, bigger, faster. And David, my friend, said, I looked at Truett, and he was clearly not engaged in the conversation, clearly not impressed with what was going on. He said, and for the first time and the only time in my career with Chick-fil-A and with Truett Cathy, suddenly, with all of us young guys with all these big ideas, Truett starts pounding on the table, pounding. He said, and suddenly everybody in the room got quiet. And he said this, he said, I am sick and tired of listening to you talk about how we can get bigger. And then he said this, and here's the quote, this hangs in my office. He said, if we get better, our customers will demand that we get bigger. If we get better, and then he said this, we need to be talking about not how to get bigger, but how to get better. Because if we get better, our customers will demand that we get bigger. And the guy that told me this actually was given a charge to our elders. He was rotating off our elder board, and we asked all of our rotating elders, to say the guys that are rotating off, to kind of give us a last charge. And he said this to us. He said, you know what, North Point, he's talking to us church leaders. He said, you know what, as big as we are, let's not forget that we need to focus on getting better.
Andy, that's an amazing story. I think it just would have been great to be there when Truett's pounding the table, just to see that. How do we get better?
Well, I think for me, and I like to simplify things, I think it's two words: clarification and evaluation. Clarification, evaluation. You clarify and evaluate.
All right, well, thank you for joining us today. I mean, I think there's got to be more than that.
Well, here's backing up even from those two things, I think every day leaders need to come to work with the assumption everything about this organization can be better, everything about this organization should be better, and as the leader, I'm responsible for making it better. I mean, regardless of how long we've been there, everything can be, everything should be, it's my responsibility to make it better. Early on, I think, as leaders, we have a lot of energy around that, especially when we're young, especially when the organization's new, or we are new to the organization. We come in there, we want to make it better, 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 better. And so we get systems in place, we get people in place, and before long, at least from our perspective, it's better than our competition. It's better than anything else we've seen before. And then something happens on the inside of us, and we lose our passion for better.
We just get complacent.
Yeah, instead of showing up to make it better, we just show up to sustain it. We show up to market it. We show up to grow it.
Right.
But sustaining it, marketing it, and growing it are not the same as making it better.
And that's really what's so great about that story.
Yeah, think about it. The oldest guy in the room, the guy that has nothing really to gain financially or in terms of reputation, the oldest guy in the room decides, wait a minute, it doesn't need to necessarily be bigger, it needs to be better. I mean, this is the guy that created the secret sauce. He is Chick-fil-A. He's got more money probably than he can spend in his lifetime. I mean, he's successful, he's famous. Why would he care about making it better? And yet there's the guy in the room pounding on the table saying, guys, we need to stop talking about making it bigger. We need to continue to be on a relentless pursuit to make this company better. So that's what makes the story so powerful.
Yeah, that is amazing. So go back to clarification and evaluation.
Yeah, again, I love those two words. It sounds simple, and I don't want to make this simplistic. By clarification, I mean, in our terminology, clarifying the win. As you look at an environment, as you look at a product, as you look at a marketing campaign, asking the question, what is the win? What is the win? When this is over with, when this initiative is over with, when this environment is established, what is the thing that we want to celebrate? What's the idea or the bullseye on the target that we know we've done this and accomplished this? And by clarifying the win, again, to use the terminology we use all over our organization, it allows a team or a group to come together and to build consensus around exactly what is it we're trying to do.
Right.
Because again, you get 12 people, you have 12 ideas of what the win is. You get 10 people together, you have 10 different bullseyes on the target.
Right.
And so the first thing, if anything's going to be better, there's got to be consensus around what is the win. So you have to clarify the win.
Right. In our world, it's environments. It's student environments, children environments,
Right.
worship environments.
But clarifying the win can be for an offsite, again, for a marketing campaign, for a sales meeting. Anytime you bring people together, anytime you launch a product, anytime you go forward to ask the question, okay, when we're looking back on this event, when we're looking back on this launch, what exactly do we hope to celebrate? That's what it means to clarify the win.
And developing consensus around that win is important.
Yeah, because again, everybody comes to meetings with ideas. And one of the difficulties in any company is so much of what we do is around conversation and around words. And words elicit mental images. But if they're not the same mental images, we all leave a meeting and move in 3 or 4 or 5 different directions, maybe not completely different directions, but there's a little bit of a lack of alignment. And
Right.
just like your car, when it's out of alignment, it wobbles. The same is true of teams. The same is true of organizations. So as we'll see in a minute, to make things better, you have to begin with clarification around exactly what is it we're trying to accomplish in an environment, with a product, with a company.
And it's not an easy thing to do.
No, it requires the M word, meetings. Yeah, it requires, sometimes it requires long meetings. It requires offsites.
Right.
It requires, it's like herding cats or herding cattle, where you get way on the outside and continue to talk and talk and talk until all the heads are at least nodding in the same direction. And there's a sense of, okay, whether or not we can pull it off is one thing, but at least we're all on the same page in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, clarifying the win.
Can you give us an example of just how that works out?
Well, my world revolves around preaching, communicating, and creating environments. So for preaching, you know what the win is for me? for people to enjoy it so much they want to come back for another dose.
Whether they believe it or not.
Yeah, whether they believe it or not, because we think if people continue to come over time, we can help change the way they think. But the win is they walked out and they said, I'm not sure I buy it all, I'm not sure I believe it all necessarily, but that was so helpful, I'll come back. I want to be so helpful that people know what to do with what they've heard. I want to be so engaging that the time flies by. And in my case, I want to be so biblical that people can open the scripture later on and find it for themselves. So when I hear stories that revolve around those ideas, for me and for our team, that's a win.
What about for the worship environment in general?
Yeah, well, as we talk about all the time in our church, the win is for somebody who would consider themselves an unchurched person or maybe a non-religious person to enjoy the environment, to be engaged in all the communication, and to walk out and say, that was helpful, I want to come back. And if they have children, to walk out and hear their children say, Mom and Dad, I want to come back to this church. So what we celebrate publicly are those kinds of conversations, those kinds of emails for our entire team, somebody who shows up who is previously unchurched, and again, doesn't necessarily believe it all, still has a lot of questions. We're not going to answer all their questions, in an hour and 5 minutes. But for them to walk away and say, I enjoyed it, I understood it, I want to come back, that's the win.
Wow. So a win is really like a goal?
Sort of. I think they're different in this way. You reach a goal, but you experience a win. And there's more emotion around experiencing something than reaching something. So I think as a team sits down and begins to ask the question, not what is our goal? I mean, that's not a bad question. Right. But when you ask the question, what is the win? I think that brings an element of emotion. Again, whether you're planning an offsite, a meeting, product launch, an environment, church service. So instead of just reaching something, we want together to experience something. I think it kind of injects emotion into the end result, and I think it injects emotion into the experience and even thinking about what it is we want to accomplish.
Right. I remember a few years ago when we did this for every environment, really nailing down what is the win for this environment. It went a long way for helping our volunteers really understand what we were trying to do.
Yeah, and it took a long time. I mean, we wanted to create a win for every age group, for every environment. And what happened, as every company experiences, when you drill down and you just come at this with some tenacity, you end up creating terminology that makes it easier to communicate what the win is, again, to employees and volunteers and even clients or customers.
Right, and if you don't clarify that for an organization or even a department, then it is hard to tell if we're doing better at what we're trying to do.
Exactly. It's impossible to evaluate if you haven't clarified the win. And that's our second word, the clarification, evaluation. Every organization evaluates at some level, but evaluation is only as effective as the clarification of the win has been. If you evaluate without clarification, the evaluation really doesn't do any good.
Yeah, it's funny. I think we've been doing this so long in this whole process that our teams can walk in on Monday morning and really already know if we were successful the day before. Even before the evaluation begins, they know.
Yeah, because there has been such intense clarification around what we're trying to accomplish. And again, as we kill ourselves over this, 90% of the people in one of our environments think it was the greatest thing they've ever been to, and we walk in, with frowns on our faces because we have so narrowed the focus of what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
We know whether or not we've gotten it right.
Right. What else would you say about evaluation?
Well, the hard part about evaluation is this. It's got to be unfiltered. If you can't talk about it, you can't improve it. If there's anything that's off limits for a conversation, there's no way to make it better. So consequently, when it comes to evaluation, as one of our staff members says, you got to put on your big boy pants, and you got to come in there and realize if we're going to make the organization better, then we've got to make each part of the organization better, which means we might have to make your part of the organization better. I know sometimes when we're evaluating Sunday morning, the thing people are very sensitive to is, can we say anything about the sermon? So I try to always start that conversation. I'll sometimes say, I would give yesterday's message a B-, or I'd say 9 o'clock service, A, 11 o'clock service. I want to let everybody know it's okay to be critical of the message. The only way for me to preach better is for there to be evaluation. So it has to be absolutely unfiltered evaluation.
Any final thoughts?
Well, you know what? I just think what Truett said about Chick-fil-A is true of all of us. We all want our organizations to grow. We all want our organizations to be bigger. But I think if we focus on making them better, if we clarify the when, if we evaluate thoroughly, if we focus on making our organizations better, I think our customers, our clients, our parishioners will demand that we make it bigger.
Andy, thanks for spending this time with us today. If you want to hear more thoughts on leadership from Andy, check out the Leadership Essentials DVD entitled Recent Random Thoughts on Church Leadership at northpointresources.org.